Well, it might be cold in Daytona, but it's hot in politics. And after claiming they were being stonewalled by the White House, the GOP now putting new pressure on the administration to answer questions about the deadly terror attack that took place in Benghazi on September 11th. Republicans have even delayed confirmations of the president's nominees, Chuck Hagel and John Brennan. Meantime, President Obama making a rather dismissive statement about the Benghazi investigation last week while answering a question about transparency in his administration. Listen.
There are a handful of issues, mostly around national security, where people have legitimate questions, where they're still concerned about whether or not we have all the information we need. Benghazi, by the way, is not a good example of that. That was largely driven by campaign stuff, because everything about that, we've had more testimony and more paper provided to Congress than ever before, and Congress is sort of running out of things to ask.
Wow. Let's bring in our political insiders to weigh in on this. John LeBoutillier, former Republican congressman for New York; Pat Caddell, a Fox News contributor and a former poster for President Jimmy Carter; and Doug Schoen, he too a Fox News contributor and former poster for Bill Clinton. All right, so let's start right there with the president. Benghazi, campaign stuff. Gentlemen, what say you?
It's not campaign stuff anymore. The
4 people are dead.
5 months ago. Well, not only that, but we're in February, and we're repeatedly learning more things because of these confirmation hearings. The Republicans are doing a good job forcing the White House to answer more questions, even though we have a lot more to learn.
I was really surprised and struck by the president's statement about Benghazi. I mean, I know that he wants to move forward, and rightly so.
That was a stunning statement, though.
But that was
a president saying, I've never quite seen that. I was watching it the first time. I've read it, but it reminds me of Nixon and Watergate. Exactly.
Really?
This is something's going on here. When John McCain used the word cover-up today, Bob Woodward was on Fox Sunday with Chris Wallace today, and he said, well, you know, there's a lot of these are legitimate questions, but, you know, we don't know. No one has seen the notes in Congress from the evacuees, whether interviewed by the FBI. No one has seen that. We don't know what the president was doing. We've said this before. There are 4 dead Americans. And what's happening is it's getting more and more the case. This thing is developing.
You've got to ask the question, why would he even go there, Doug? I mean, you work with Democratic presidents. He raised the issue.
Here's what he's trying to do. He is trying to dismiss the whole question, and you're exactly right, Kelly. 4 dead Americans. We don't know, as Pat and John were suggesting, what happened that night. Who did the president talk to? We don't know. But he's trying to dismiss it out of hand, turn it into partisanship, because the questions aren't answered. The Republicans, by contrast, are trying to keep it alive, as they should, because A, they're legitimate questions, and B, it puts people like Hagel and Brennan, and even Jack Lewitt was raised in his hearing, under the microscope.
Under the microscope, and the Republicans are right to scrutinize, just as the Democrats would be right to scrutinize. The right to know, but you have the right to scrutinize.
It's not just the fact they made up this lie narrative that they did, which was a lie, which was totally invented, which we understand why for the campaign. And Romney let him get away with it. That's Romney's fault. But the 4 dead Americans, we don't know what happened, and it's clear the president was absent. As I said last week, I worked for a president in the middle of a crisis, and a hostage crisis, and it consumed him every single minute of every day.
Kelly, I remember in 1995, I was working for Bill Clinton. I think it was Scott O'Grady who got out of Bosnia. And I remember the National Security Advisor, Tony Lake, coming in to brief Bill Clinton when O'Grady got out of Bosnia. The President of the United States, as he should have been, was following this case as closely as you and I would follow something involving our families, our children. And it just, Pat, John, it strikes me as incongruous that the President of the United States wouldn't have been up to date minute to minute on September 11th.
Well, I think we don't know why this is being covered up. But politically, because we are the political insiders, here is a case finally where the Republicans are effectively doing something together in opposition to the administration, which is what their job is. It's a check and a balance, right? And they're using congressional power to force answers to come from the White House.
I'm going to tell you, if this were any other president, I think the media would be so deep.
I know where you're going with this. I know where you're going with this.
Unbelievable how they have gone in the tank on this when we are clearly being fed a series of stories. And what's under oath, when people admit that they didn't speak to the president, the Secretary of Defense once, the Secretary of State hardly at all. He was
Joint Chiefs, no.
Joint no one.
There are other issues out there going on, and we'll obviously have time to talk about that. But the State of the Union address, what was your impression of that?
My take is that it was a solid presentation of a series of initiatives that are popular, poll tested, but don't really address the central question of the debt, the deficit, the lack of a budget, the lack of a clear plan for our future. And bottom line, between Marco Rubio's response and the President's State of the Union, we're no closer to dealing with our large-scale issues than we were before.
Doug, I don't mean to interrupt, but you took the words out of my mouth, because I was going to ask you, gentlemen, did the President lack the opportunity, or did he waste the opportunity to cast a vision for the country?
Yes. Yes. And you know what the vision that works politically is to go against your own type and standing. In other words, he's a liberal Democrat. Great. Where he would be more effective is if he disavowed some part of liberalism for a higher cause and said, we can't do this.
John.
He did. Instead of doing that, he goes to the left even more. Now, these poll-tested things that Doug mentioned, in fact, the things he talked about, more investment in clean energy and infrastructure. We've got a poll from Rasmussen.
Let's bring up the Rasmussen poll to show exactly what you're talking about there, John. If we can bring that up. And while we're talking about it, the consequence of this is that the president failed to move the country forward. Here we're looking at this right now.
Which would help the economy more? More government cuts, 55%, more spending on the things. So only 36% agree with the president.
The reason that he changed from his inaugural address, where he never mentioned the economy, to this speech, which was, quote, about the economy, but was really about government, bigger government, more spending, is because the country's consumed with those issues. The issues that he's been talking about, climate change, some of the others, are at the bottom. Pew had them at the bottom of people's concerns. So the answer is, the president's pushing an agenda. He's pushing a campaign to defeat the Republicans in 2014.
And the Republicans
have no narrative and are sitting there like lunks. I mean, we finally had a real Watergate in a response. We finally got Watergate.
Yeah, and I'm going
to
let me address what I said too when I said the president failed to move the country forward. And what I mean by that is that he failed an opportunity to move the country closer together, to find some common ground.
The man who was going to unite America about there's no red America, blue America. This man, as Doug and I have written last year early on, is the most divisive president in our lifetime.
And there is
he is tearing the country apart.
He speaks of bipartisanship,
he doesn't want
but he offers no policies that offer any hope of achieving bipartisanship. And bottom line, he is doing nothing more than trying to eliminate the Republican
Party. Even the
Party.
immigration thing today comes out. You've got actually, for the only time in Congress, they're talking to each other, and he wants a proposal that will blow that up.
John, the Democrats are speaking.
Yeah,
so we got to go. We're going to come right
Democrats.
back. We are now just 2 weeks away from, while they're still talking, we're now 2 weeks away from deep spending cuts known as sequestration that some warn could put our national security at risk. So can Congress come up with a responsible way to deal with this before it's too late? I want to start with the sequestration.
Yeah.
And Dennis McDonough, the White House Chief of Staff, said today on television that the president is not giving up on averting the sequestration. But is he doing enough to stop it?
You know, Kelly, I would have thought that the president would have spoken directly about the sequestration in the State of the Union, would have called for talks with the Republicans, extended an olive branch in terms of policy, and bottom line, the speech, as you suggested before, didn't do any of that. Bottom line, we're looking at crippling cuts in domestic programs, crippling cuts in foreign assistance, in our military programs. These are really, really draconian cuts. Neither side wants them, but neither side is putting forward a realistic plan. It makes no sense. It's very bad.
Well, you know, this is the consequence of a Washington is so dysfunctional. You know, the president who proposed, demanded these, now says he has no idea where they came from. The Republicans and the Democratic leaders in Congress who voted for them act like they had nothing to do with it. And it was all supposed to make them come to the table and do reasonable cuts. These are so across the board and draconian without any sense of anything. But it tells me everything about our politics. We see it in the Hagel hearing. Bob Woodward today on Fox said that Democratic senators are calling the White House, some of them saying, "Can you get rid of Chuck Hagel for us?" You know, and the White House say no, but none of them will say it publicly. No one will stand up for the country. Back to your point, the president doesn't lead for the country. The Congress doesn't lead for the country. These people put their party above principle and above the country all the time.
And by the way, on the mirror opposite of that Pat said so well, the two parties have run away from a mess they created, sequestration. They also created the ultimate solution to it in the Simpson-Bowles Debt Reduction Commission. They both created it. The president appointed it. Congress put some other members on. They came up with a 10-year plan for $4 trillion in cuts and savings.
But why,
they've run away from that.
Why did they lack the courage to do the right thing?
Because of the extremes in both parties. Bottom line, you couldn't get the Republican right to go for any revenue increases. You couldn't get the Democratic left to do entitlement reform. John is exactly right. Paul Ryan was against it. The president walked away from it. We couldn't get a bipartisan consensus for a plan that would revitalize the economy, produce growth, and create jobs. Kelly, it's a tragedy.
Doug, one thing about one thing.
Quickly, John, we got to go.
I talked to a Republican congressman. Why don't you vote for Simpson-Bowles? And he said, well, a lot of the members say because it has tax increases. I said, but goodness, you've already agreed to this. You've already raised taxes.
They've already done it.
They've already done it.
Look,
so that's not an issue.
The real answer is they will not put the country first.
Right.
They will not come up with something that said, how do we grow our economy? This Washington game is all about their power and position. That's why the Congress has 11%
Caddell,
rating today.
Doug Schoen, John LeBoutillier, always love talking to you gentlemen about what's going on in our country.
You
can get more from the Political Insiders every Monday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern at live.foxnews.com. And they will be back here next Sunday. Make sure you're here to see them. You can also follow them on Twitter at FN Insiders.